It was late summer in 1987, the kind of August afternoon when the sun felt heavy on the shoulders, and the air carried the smell of the lake mixed with cut grass. In the quiet town of Ridgeway, Michigan, days drifted by slowly. Nothing shocking ever seemed to happen, and most people believed it never would. Ridgeway was the type of place where parents left their doors unlocked and neighbors waved at each passing car, even if they didn't know who was driving. But everything changed on the evening 13-year-old Hannah Cole disappeared, a disappearance that would haunt the town for nearly 2 decades. Hannah was small, with long dark hair that she wore in a loose braid down her back. She was known for her bright laugh and a habit of riding her bike everywhere, even when she had nowhere special to go. That summer, she spent most of her days exploring the trails that wound through the woods behind her neighborhood. Her mother, Linda, trusted her deeply, but always told her to be back before sunset. Hannah always listened, always came home on time. That was why the night she disappeared felt wrong from the very first moment. On that day, Hannah had asked to take her bike down to the waterfront trail. She loved the path that ran alongside Lake Huron, especially when the wind made ripples across the water and the sky turned pink near dusk. Her mother hesitated for a moment, but the weather was perfect. The town was safe, and Hannah promised she would be home before dinner. She smiled, grabbed her bike, and pedaled down the driveway. No one knew that would be the last time her family saw her alive. When she did not return home, Linda felt a sharp worry in her chest. She tried to stay calm at first. She checked the garage, the backyard, even her neighbor's house. Nothing. As the minutes stretched into hours, panic grew. The sun dipped low behind the trees, and the sky turned deep blue. Linda called the police. Officers arrived with flashlights and radios, asking questions that sounded more frightening every time they were repeated. They asked what Hannah had been wearing, what route she usually took, whether she had fought with anyone recently. Linda answered everything through shaking breaths. Search teams formed quickly. Neighbors came out with lanterns, walking the trails along the lake. They called her name again and again, their voices echoing in the dark woods. No one heard anything. No one saw anything. Her bike was not found. Her backpack was not found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. By midnight, the search grew larger. More officers arrived, along with dogs trained to pick up scents. The dogs pulled toward the lake, then around the trail, then circled again, confused. The scent stopped abruptly near the overlook where the trees opened up to a steep drop into shallow water. But there were no signs of a fall. The ground was undisturbed. No footprints, no torn fabric. It was as if she had walked straight into the air and disappeared. The next morning brought reporters, helicopters, and camera crews. Ridgeway changed overnight. The town that once felt safe now seemed full of shadows and questions. People whispered to one another in grocery store lines. Parents held their children closer. Many believed she had been kidnapped. Others feared she had fallen into the lake and drowned. But the police found no evidence to support either idea. Weeks turned into months, and the case became colder and more frustrating for everyone involved. The local police called in state investigators. Posters with Hannah's face appeared in every nearby town. Flyers hung on telephone poles, until the corners curled and the ink dripped from rain. Every tip led nowhere. Every clue faded. The lake never gave up a bike, a shoe, anything. Her family stayed strong for as long as they could. Her mother kept her bedroom untouched. Her father returned again and again to the trail where she was last seen, walking slowly along the water, like he expected to find something new. But nothing ever changed. Years passed. Ridgeway learned to carry the weight of her disappearance like a scar. The story grew into a legend. Parents told their children when warning them not to wander too far from home. The woods felt different after that. The lake seemed colder, darker, and less welcoming. But in 2005, 18 years after she vanished, Hannah's name made headlines again. A discovery made by a United States Navy vessel during a routine training mission just off the Michigan shoreline changed everything. It was a discovery no one expected, something hidden in the deep water that finally broke the silence around her disappearance, something that would lead investigators to the truth buried for years beneath the waves. What the Navy found did not just reopen the case, it shocked everyone who remembered the girl who rode her bike toward the lake on a warm August evening and never returned. The discovery began on a gray morning in September 2005, when a Navy training vessel moved slowly across a quiet stretch of Lake Huron. The team on board was testing new underwater sonar equipment designed to detect objects buried deep beneath the lake bed. It was supposed to be a routine run, nothing unusual, something they had done many times. But around mid-morning, the sonar screen lit up with an unexpected shape. At first, the crew thought it was just debris or a rock formation. But the outline was too precise, too clean. It looked like something man-made. The vessel circled back, sending stronger pulses into the water. When the image sharpened, a silence settled over the room. The sonar showed the shadowy shape of a bicycle, lying on its side, half buried in silt at the bottom of the lake. Its frame appeared small and rusted, but the handlebars and wheels were still visible. Even through the distortion of the sonar, the object was unmistakable. There had been hundreds of missing persons cases across Michigan, but one of the officers on board grew still as he stared at the screen. He remembered something, a story he had heard years ago, long before he joined the Navy, a girl who vanished in Ridgeway while riding her bike near the waterfront trail. He didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the thought stayed with him. The Navy was not responsible for criminal investigations, but protocol required them to report unusual findings, especially when found near documented missing cases. Within hours, state police were notified, and within a day, the quiet town of Ridgeway found itself once again surrounded by news vans and reporters, repeating a name the community had nearly stopped saying aloud: Hannah Cole. Police divers were sent to recover the bike. The water that morning was cold and still, with hardly any wind. The divers moved slowly down the cable ladder and vanished beneath the surface. Minutes passed, then 20, then 40. The tension on the boat grew heavier with each passing second. When the divers finally emerged, pulling something wrapped in a protective tarp, a heavy hush fell across the deck. The bike was confirmed almost immediately. The small frame, the shade of faded blue paint still visible under rust, and the crooked reflector Hannah's father had put on the back months before she vanished. Her family had described the exact details repeatedly, and now, after 18 years, here it was, brought back from the depths of Lake Huron. News spread fast. People from Ridgeway gathered in small groups along the waterfront, watching the police boats move across the lake. Some held their hands to their mouths. Others stared quietly, remembering the girl with the braid who once passed their houses on her bike. It felt like the lake was finally giving up one of its secrets. The discovery of the bike changed everything. Investigators, who had long retired, were contacted and reopened files they had not touched in years. The old case box was filled with brittle notes, faded photos, and maps marked with circles and red ink. They began going through everything again, treating it like a brand new investigation. The question that echoed everywhere was simple but terrifying. If the bike was found in the lake, what happened to Hannah? The area where the bike was located was not a place she would have reached on her own. It was far deeper than where the shoreline met the walking path. It was past the drop, far past any trail or safe edge. A child would not simply ride out there. Someone would have had to carry her bike, or carry her. While the state police worked the case, another mystery appeared. The bike was found deep enough that it could not have been pushed in from the shore. Currents in that part of the lake were not strong enough to pull an object so far out. The angle of the handlebars and the position of the wheels in the dirt suggested it had sunk straight down, as if dropped from a boat rather than thrown from the shoreline. This one detail rewrote the entire theory of the case. Someone had taken Hannah, taken her bike, and gone onto the water, and someone had dropped the bike into the lake, letting it sink into the darkness below. 18 years earlier, no one had considered searching so far out. No one had thought her bike would end up hidden in deep water. And now, the investigation shifted toward anyone who owned a boat at the time. As this new lead surfaced, Hannah's mother received the news in her small living room, where her daughter's last school photo still sat on a shelf. She held the edges of the picture frame tightly, her hands shaking. She had spent years imagining every possible outcome, every possible truth, but never once had she imagined that a Navy ship would find something, that the lake would speak again after so long. In the days that followed, police returned to the waterfront trail. For the first time in years, the area was lined with crime scene tape. Officers walked slowly along the path, as if retracing steps from 18 summers earlier. They collected soil samples, searched the woods again, even though nearly everything that once stood there had changed. New growth covered old trails. Fallen trees hid places where searchers once stood. With flashlights in the dark, time had erased nearly all physical evidence. But now investigators believed that someone in Ridgeway knew something they had never said aloud. Rumors began to move through the town again. People looked at their neighbors differently. They wondered who had a boat in 1987, who had been on the lake that evening, who had acted strangely after Hannah vanished. Small details that meant nothing at the time suddenly felt important. A broken dock, a missing fishing net, a man who left town suddenly, a woman who refused to talk to police. Everyone remembered something, even if they didn't realize it. The discovery of the bike did more than revive the case. It reopened old wounds, old fears, and old suspicions. But it also brought something new, something the town had lost long ago. A sense that maybe, after almost 2 decades, Hannah's story was not finished, that maybe the truth was finally rising to the surface after being hidden underwater all those years. And the Navy crew, unaware of the emotional storm they had sparked, continued their mission quietly. They had no idea that a second sonar scan, done the next day, would reveal something even more chilling, something that would not only shock the investigators, but would turn the entire case on its head. Something that would finally point to what happened to Hannah Cole on that warm August evening. The next morning, the lake was calm again, as if it had not stirred up the entire state of Michigan the day before. The Navy crew returned to the same area, partly out of routine, and partly because what they found had unsettled them. They wanted to run another set of scans, this time covering a wider radius around the location where the bike was discovered. The sun had barely risen when their equipment began pulsing through the water, releasing long, slow waves that reached far beneath the surface. At first, everything looked normal. Schools of fish darting in clusters, sloping lines of sediment, the faint shadows of rocks. But then, about 40 minutes into the scan, the screen showed something else. A shape that did not match anything natural. It was long, narrow, and metallic, lying flat on the lake bed. It was far larger than a bike, and positioned deeper than the first object. The outline was too defined to be a piece of debris. One of the technicians leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes narrowing. The shape looked like a small boat. Word spread quickly. By the time police arrived, the Navy had already marked the exact coordinates. Divers prepared again, pulling on their wetsuits in silence. They moved into the water, descending into the cold darkness below, their lights cutting through the murky green haze. The visibility was worse than the previous day, and the deeper they went, the more the water felt heavy and quiet. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the divers reached the lake bed. A small aluminum fishing boat lay on its side, covered in a thin layer of silt. The boat was old, clearly from the 1980s, with flaking paint and a dent along one edge. But that was not what made the divers freeze in place. Inside the boat were bones. They were tightly tucked along the bottom, as if someone had curled up and remained there for years. The divers stayed still for several seconds, neither speaking nor moving, before alerting the surface team. The recovery began immediately, done slowly and carefully, piece by piece. When the boat was finally pulled to the surface, a crowd of officers, forensic experts, and detectives stood waiting, barely breathing. The remains appeared to belong to a young person, too small to be an adult, too old to be a small child. And as soon as they were laid out under the tent on shore, every investigator felt the same sickening certainty settle into their chest. This was Hannah. But the medical examiner insisted on being careful. 18 years in lake water made identification difficult. Clothing fibers were nearly gone. Hair strands were thin and brittle. But there were just enough remains to run DNA against samples collected from her family years before. Everyone knew the result before the test was even completed. The confirmation only made it official. The girl who once rode her bike along Ridgeway's quiet trails had been found at last. As news of the discovery broke, the town reacted in a wave of disbelief and grief. Some people cried openly in grocery store aisles when they heard. Others sat in their cars, staring out at nothing. The idea that she had been underwater so close to home all this time made people feel both heartbroken and uneasy. It was as if the lake had kept her secret on purpose, refusing to let go until the moment was right. But even with her remains recovered, one question became louder than all the rest. How did she end up in that boat? The idea that she had climbed in herself made no sense. The location was too far from shore, and she would not have gone out alone. Investigators believed she had been taken, but the boat raised new mysteries. Why had it sunk? Why had the kidnapper abandoned it? And why had no one reported a missing boat? Forensic teams studied the boat closely. It had two deep dents along the left side, as if it had hit something or been shoved off a dock. The small outboard motor was missing, but the mounting brackets showed marks that suggested it had been removed forcefully. Heavy stones were found inside, likely placed there to make the boat sink. That meant someone wanted it underwater. Someone wanted the evidence gone. And there was one more detail. A small metal bracelet, corroded but still readable, was found wedged between the wooden slats. Near the back of the boat, it had been bent almost in half, but the engraving on the inside was clear enough to make every officer pause. NC, two initials. Her initial. Her mother later confirmed it was a gift, given to Hannah the year she turned 12. She had not been wearing it the day she disappeared, or at least, not that her mother remembered. But memories from 18 years earlier were blurred and uncertain. People began to wonder whether she had taken it with her secretly, or whether someone else had taken it from her room. As detectives pieced together these clues, they began focusing on the idea that someone familiar with the lake had been involved. Someone who knew the deep areas well. Someone who had access to a boat and knew how to sink it without drawing suspicion. Their list of potential suspects was long, but one name surfaced repeatedly in their old notes. A man who owned a cabin near the shoreline. A man who had been interviewed briefly in 1987, but had given vague answers that investigators had dismissed at the time. Arthur Bell. He had been in his late 30s then, living alone, known for fishing early in the mornings and disappearing for long periods, without explaining where he went. People in town remembered him for being quiet and keeping to himself. After Hannah vanished, he moved to another county, then another state, changing jobs often. At the time, no one thought much of it. Ridgeway was shaken, and many people moved away, unable to stand the memory. But now, with the discovery of the boat, detectives looked back at Arthur's file with fresh eyes. His boat, according to the original report, had been sold shortly before he left Michigan. The paperwork seemed normal, but the description of the boat he claimed to have sold was strikingly similar to the one found underwater. The same model, the same size, the same color. Investigators found themselves staring at the possibility that the boat he claimed to have sold had never been sold at all. Instead, it had been resting at the bottom of Lake Huron since the night Hannah disappeared. And before long, they discovered something else that made their suspicion grow stronger. Something from his background that had never been fully explored. Something that had been overlooked because investigators had assumed he had no connection to Hannah. But they were wrong. Arthur Bell had once worked at Ridgeway Middle School, the same school Hannah attended, and he left that job suddenly just months before she vanished. The deeper detectives dug, the more their unease grew. They needed to find him. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. Because if Arthur had taken Hannah to the lake that night, he had stayed silent for 18 years. But the truth they were about to uncover would be far darker, far stranger, and far more unexpected than anyone imagined. Detectives working the reopened case felt the pressure rising as the details around Arthur Bell grew darker with every passing day. They spread his old employment files, school records, and interviews across a large table, trying to stitch together who he really was. And for so long, he had been a small footnote in Hannah Cole's missing person report. Now he was standing at the center of the story, like a shadow that had always been there but went unnoticed, until the light shifted. In the old staff photos from Ridgeway Middle School, Arthur looked uncomfortable, stiff, like someone who didn't want to be seen. He was a maintenance worker, responsible for small repairs and groundskeeping. He wasn't a teacher, but he was around students every day. He had access to the school's storage rooms, tools, and the back entrances that teachers rarely used. When he left the job, he gave the reason of wanting a new start. No one questioned it. Detectives noticed something troubling in the notes from his 1987 interview. When officers asked him where he had been during the evening, Hannah disappeared. He hesitated before saying he was home alone. No one had been able to confirm the alibi. But at the time, Ridgeway police were overwhelmed, and they had no evidence pointing directly at him. He faded from the investigation as quickly as he entered it. But now, with her bike and remains recovered deep in the lake, detectives believed the truth was hidden inside the small things people overlooked. So they retraced his life. They found property records showing that Arthur once owned a cabin only about a mile from where the lake met the walking trail. The cabin sat behind tall pine trees, barely visible from the road. In 1987, no one had lived close enough to hear anything unusual. It was isolated, the perfect place for someone who wanted privacy. Detectives drove out to that old cabin. It was abandoned now, sagging at the roofline, swallowed by wild grass and vines. The windows were broken, and the porch boards bent under every step. They walked through slowly, careful not to disturb anything. Sunlight poured through the gaps in the ceiling, illuminating long-forgotten objects scattered across the dusty floor. Empty jars, old boots, fishing lures, a rusted lantern. But in the back room, one detective noticed deep scratches on the wooden floor, dragged in straight lines as if something heavy had been pulled across it repeatedly. The marks had been worn smooth with time, but they were still visible. Something else caught their eye. Behind a loose wall panel, tucked into the darkness, was a small metal box. Rust covered the edges, but the latch still opened. Inside were several items sealed in a plastic bag to protect them from moisture. The objects were simple, ordinary, and terrifying. A small hair tie, a faded photograph of a girl at a school picnic, a folded napkin with blue ink scribbles, a silver charm shaped like a bird. When detectives compared the items with the old evidence photos, their stomachs sank. The hair tie matched one Hannah often wore. The charm matched a piece from a set her mother had given her. The scribbles on the napkin were the same drawings Hannah made in her notebooks. Small birds, the kind she always doodled in the margins of her school papers. The discovery at the cabin shifted the investigation from suspicion to something sharper, something unavoidable. They needed to locate Arthur Bell, and quickly. But finding him was not going to be simple. His records from the late 1990s showed frequent moves. He drifted between states, taking short-term jobs on farms, in factories, and at marinas. He always paid rent in cash. He never stayed in one place longer than a few months. No arrests, no traffic tickets, nothing to track him. Investigators sent his name through national databases. They checked employment records. They searched property sales and utility accounts. Every lead dead-ended. But then, somewhere deep in the stack of information, an analyst found something unusual. A volunteer form from a small community center in Wisconsin, filled out in handwriting that matched Arthur Bell's old employment file. The form was only 3 years old. Detectives traveled there immediately. The center director remembered him faintly. A quiet man who helped with maintenance and lawn care. He worked hard, never complained, never talked about himself. He lived in a small rental house near the edge of town. But when they arrived, the house was empty, dust thick on the windowsills. He had left without warning nearly 2 years earlier. Inside, the house felt bare, but the investigators noticed something odd. A map pinned to the wall. A map of the Great Lakes. Certain areas were circled in pencil. Ports, fishing spots, old marinas, places Arthur seemed drawn to. In one circle, darker than the rest, marked a location, only a few miles from Ridgeway's shoreline. The same area where the Navy found the sunk boat. The evidence was lining up too neatly to be coincidence. But detectives still needed one thing: proof that Arthur had taken Hannah onto that lake. And as they pushed deeper into his past, they stumbled onto a detail no one had seen before. Something buried in school records that should have raised questions in 1987, but didn't. A teacher's note about a man loitering near the playground, written about 2 months before Hannah disappeared. The handwriting was hard to read, the ink smudged, but the description matched Arthur perfectly. He had been seen standing close to the fence during recess, watching the children. The teacher wrote that she felt uncomfortable and planned to speak with the principal, but there was no record that anyone followed up. As soon as detectives processed this, another lead emerged, a name belonging to a woman who once worked part-time at the marina near Ridgeway. She had told officers in 1987 that she saw a man loading something heavy into a small aluminum boat around twilight. She mentioned he seemed nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. She couldn't see what he was carrying. The report was buried in the file, recorded but never connected to any suspect. At the time, it was only one of dozens of vague statements. But now, every detail about the boat, the location, and the time frame pointed back to Arthur. Investigators returned to interview the woman, now older and living in another state. She remembered that day clearly. She remembered the man's unkempt hair, the worn jacket, the way he avoided eye contact. She remembered thinking he was unfriendly, but not dangerous. And she remembered one final detail that made the detectives lean forward. He had a small blue bicycle in the back of his truck earlier that same afternoon. When investigators asked why she hadn't reported that sooner, she laughed softly and shook her head. She said she didn't understand the importance of the bike at the time. She assumed he had a daughter. She assumed he was a father picking up his child from school. The idea that it was connected to Hannah's disappearance never crossed her mind. With this new piece of information, the case was no longer a puzzle without edges. The lines were forming a clear picture. Arthur had taken Hannah somewhere near the water, used his boat to move her, and tried to erase every trace. But the lake had hidden his secret only for so long. Officers sent out alerts across multiple states, contacting agencies from Michigan to Wisconsin to Minnesota. Days turned into weeks, and the urgency grew heavier with each passing hour. But then, in early October, a break came from a surprising place. A fisherman in a small lakeside town in Minnesota reported someone who matched Arthur's description. A quiet man, living in a cheap rental cabin near the water, working odd jobs, keeping to himself. The address was sent to investigators. Officers prepared to move. They did not know then what they were about to find behind that cabin door. They did not know that Arthur had kept more than memories of the past. They did not know he had kept a record. A written confession, hidden in the one place no one would expect. A confession that revealed truths even darker than anyone imagined. The cabin in Minnesota sat at the edge of a quiet lake, surrounded by tall grass that swayed in the wind like whispering voices. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where people passed each other on dirt roads with a simple nod and kept their thoughts to themselves. That isolation was exactly why investigators felt certain Arthur Bell had chosen it. A team of officers approached the cabin just after dawn. The lake was still, a sheet of glass reflecting a muted gray sky. Birds were beginning to stir in the treetops. Everything felt too calm, too silent. A detective knocked firmly, their voices echoing through the trees. No answer. Another knock. Still nothing. They exchanged glances. A neighbor had said Arthur rarely left before noon. The silence wasn't normal. An officer tried the door. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air felt cold, as if the room had been untouched for days. Dust floated through the sunlight streaming from a cracked window. A small table sat against the wall, with an empty cup, a folded map, and a pencil worn down to its last inch. The cabin was tidy, but in a way that didn't feel natural. It was the tidiness of someone preparing to disappear. They moved through carefully, checking each room. In the bedroom, blankets were thrown across the bed, and a duffel bag lay half-packed on the floor. Clothes tangled with rope, a flashlight, canned food, and a small lockbox. The bathroom was empty. The small back porch, empty. It looked like Arthur had known they were coming, but as an officer opened the last cabinet door in the main room, he froze. Inside, wrapped in plastic and tied with old twine, was a thick notebook with worn edges. The cover was water-stained, the binding cracked. It looked old, decades old. Written across the front in faded ink were two words, barely readable. For me. The officers exchanged uneasy looks. A detective slipped on gloves and lifted the notebook carefully. The weight of it was unsettling, as if it carried the past inside it like a hidden heartbeat. They opened it. The first page was blank. The second page contained a short passage that made every investigator's breath stop. I never meant for it to happen like that. But I could not let her go. She knew my face. She knew where I worked. She would have told someone. I never wanted to hurt her. I only wanted someone to listen. Detectives turned the page. June 11th. She almost crashed into me on the trail, riding too fast, laughing like she wasn't afraid of anything. She apologized. She told me her name, Hannah. She asked if I needed help with the toolbox I was carrying. I told her no, but I followed her with my eyes until she left. I shouldn't have. The room grew heavier. Page after page revealed details more disturbing than anyone expected. Arthur wrote about watching children at the school, not interacting, watching. He wrote about feeling invisible, unnoticed, drifting through life without meaning. He mentioned how Hannah reminded him of someone he once knew, someone who had been kind to him in childhood, before leaving his life forever. June 20th. She smiled at me again today. Just a quick smile as she rode past. I don't think she knows what she does to people. I don't think she understands how loneliness can twist a man. June 20th. I followed her, only for a moment. I don't know what I was thinking. I told myself it was a mistake. June 3rd. They won't find her. The lake keeps its secrets if you know how to treat it. Detectives paused. They could hear their own heartbeats in the silence of the cabin. They read on. He wrote about the bike. He wrote about the exact stretch of shoreline where he took her. But the entries around July grew fragmented, as if guilt had begun to pull him apart. I shouldn't have taken her. I only wanted to talk. She panicked. She screamed. I didn't think. I didn't mean to grab her that hard. I didn't mean to push her. It all happened too fast. They reached the entry detailing the moment everything changed. Her head hit the side of the boat. The sound won't leave me. She stopped moving and I froze. I didn't know what to do. I kept saying her name even after she was gone. I tried to wake her. I thought maybe she was still breathing. Then the final line on that page. She wasn't. Investigators felt the room tilt under the weight of the words. Decades of questions had suddenly been replaced by an answer no one wanted. They continued reading. Arthur described how he loaded Hannah's body into the boat, took it toward the deeper part of the lake, and weighted it before pushing it into the water. He wrote about the panic consuming him, how he sank the bicycle days later, when he realized someone might recognize it. But then something unexpected appeared in the entries from years later. Regret. Real regret. He wrote about nightmares, about seeing Hannah's face every time he closed his eyes. He wrote about moving from place to place, never able to settle. He wrote about waiting for police to knock on his door for years. One line stood out. Every time I hear footsteps outside, I think it is them. I think they finally know. At the end of the notebook, the tone shifted again. The handwriting grew shaky, uneven. There is no forgiveness for what I did. I am leaving this here, because someone will come eventually. I thought I could outrun the past, but it is always behind me. No matter where I go, I hear the lake calling. The last entry was dated only 5 days before investigators arrived.
I heard someone asking about me in town. I know what it means. I won't be here when they return. I am tired, and the lake is waiting.
When detectives finished reading the notebook, they placed it carefully into an evidence bag. The air in the cabin felt colder now, heavier, as if Arthur's words still lingered in the walls. They stepped outside into the gray morning. A search team was already gathering, preparing to search the surrounding woods and shoreline. But deep down, the lead detective felt a sinking truth. They weren't searching for Arthur to arrest him. They were searching because the notebook was not just a confession, it was a farewell. And he had gone back to the one place he believed would keep his final secret, the lake. The lake sat untouched in the morning light, its surface smooth and silver, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But every detective standing on the shoreline knew better. They knew the lake held stories, stories buried so deep that most people believed they were gone forever. And now, after reading Arthur Bell's notebook, they knew exactly where to look. A team of divers arrived from the local sheriff's department. Some had been on the job for decades. Others were new, still unused to the weight of cold cases. They geared up quietly, the only sounds the clicking of buckles, the hiss of oxygen tanks, and the low rustle of wind through the trees. As they slipped into the water, the lake swallowed them whole. The lead diver had studied the notebook carefully. Arthur had described the place he returned to again and again in his mind, the place where the water was darker, where the trees loomed overhead, where he believed the lake had accepted his secret. The diver swam toward that area, moving in slow, powerful strokes. Underwater, the world turned into shades of deep green and murky brown. The visibility was low. Sunlight broke through in scattered beams, lighting up clouds of drifting sand. Branches and old roots twisted in every direction, making the lake bed feel like an underwater forest. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The shoreline team watched anxiously as bubbles rose to the surface. Every time a diver surfaced to adjust gear or catch breath, They shook their heads slightly. Not yet. The lead detective kept gripping the notebook inside an evidence bag, as if holding it could somehow bring closure faster. Hannah's parents stood farther back. Time had carved lines into their faces, lines of years spent searching, hoping, grieving silently. They said nothing. They simply stared at the lake, their eyes tracking every ripple. Then, at last, one diver lifted an arm above the water and waved urgently. They had found something. People rushed toward the shore. Investigators leaned forward as the diver surfaced and pulled off his mask. His expression told them everything. Whatever he found wasn't small. He called out in a breathless voice, "There's a boat. An old rowboat. It's on its side, tangled in weeds. And there's something under it. Something heavy." The divers went back under, working together to shift the boat slightly. It had been underwater for nearly 2 decades, rusted, broken, and covered in thick layers of algae. When they cleared away enough debris, they uncovered a cluster of metal weights tied to rotted rope. And beneath the weights was a small shape. They didn't disturb it. They surfaced again, explaining what they saw. One diver's voice cracked. "It's her. We think it's her." The shoreline fell painfully silent. Recovery took time. The team moved with the care of surgeons, gently lifting the remains from the lake bed, making sure nothing was lost. When they brought her to the surface, the detectives bowed their heads. Hannah had been missing for 18 years, and now, after all this time, she was finally going home. As the remains were placed on a stretcher and covered respectfully, Hannah's mother broke into tears for the first time that day. Her husband held her tightly. It was grief. Yes, deep and sharp, but also relief. They finally had answers. They finally had a place to mourn, instead of an empty trail that led nowhere. But the search wasn't over, because Arthur Bell was still out there. A secondary team canvassed the woods behind the cabin. Dogs searched for scent trails. Officers combed through bushes, tall grass, and narrow pathways. Every broken twig or displaced rock felt like a clue. They searched until the sun sank low and the sky turned orange. Then a call came from a deputy near the far side of the lake. "I found something. You need to come now." Everyone hurried toward the location. The deputy pointed toward the shoreline, where the trees opened into a small clearing. Something lay near the edge of the water. A pair of shoes, black, worn-out shoes, placed neatly side by side. Beside them was a folded jacket, and next to the jacket lay a simple handwritten note, weighed down by a smooth stone. Its edges fluttered softly in the evening breeze. The detective lifted it. It was only one sentence written in Arthur's shaky handwriting. "I am giving the lake what it already owns." The meaning was clear. They began searching the water again, but this time with the weight of certainty pressing down on them. The divers swept the area around the clearing. The water here was deeper, darker, more tangled with roots and fallen branches. It didn't take long. A diver surfaced with a grim expression and quietly confirmed what everyone already suspected. Arthur Bell had drowned himself. The lake had taken him too. The news spread through Meadows Creek before nightfall. Some felt relief. The man responsible for Hannah's disappearance could no longer hide behind lies or distance. Others felt frustration, angry that he escaped true justice. But most people simply felt the same thing: exhaustion. 18 years of mystery had finally ended. The funeral for Hannah Collins was held 1 week later. The church overflowed with people who had never forgotten her. Old classmates, teachers, families who had searched alongside her parents. Even strangers who had moved to town long after she vanished, but still felt connected to the story. The procession moved past the quiet streets, through the neighborhood where she once rode her bike, then up the hill overlooking the lake. The same lake that hid her for so long. Her mother placed a small white flower on the casket. Her father kept his hand on her shoulder, steadying her as she whispered something no one else could hear. Peace finally settled over Meadows Creek. As for the Navy's sonar operator, who first spotted the submerged bicycle in 2005, he later said he never forgot that moment. A routine sweep, a strange shape, a bike caught in weeds, small details that changed everything. Sometimes, answers hide underwater for years, waiting for the right eyes to notice. And sometimes, even after almost 2 decades, truth rises to the surface. The case was officially closed. But the story of the girl who vanished in 1987 and the lake that kept her secret would live on in the memories of everyone who searched for her, mourned her, and finally brought her home.